It's been a little while, my friends. I hope you haven't been lonely. The winter months have well and truly rolled in. The darkness takes up so much more of our lives. This is the time of year that the veil gets thin, that the barrier between our world and that other one can be breached more easily. A time where anything is possible. Tonight I'm bringing you 7 brand new paranormal tales that have been sent in by you listeners out there. Please remember, whatever you may personally believe, the people who submitted these stories all claim that they experienced something very real. I hope you're cozy out there and safe. Thank you for tuning in to Night Drive Paranormal. Let's get into our first story. Growing up, I was very close to my papa. His name was John. John and I spent a lot of time together. We did everything together. Growing up, I didn't have a dad, so he stepped into that role. In 2014, I was in my second year of high school. John started to act differently. His health very quickly deteriorated, and in the space of 2 weeks, I lost him. His death hit me hard. I didn't know how to handle it and quickly isolated myself from my friends and family. About a week or so after his death, one night, it was around 2 a.m, I was still awake. I could barely sleep and I was still struggling hard with his death. I was in my bed sat up, reading a book, with a small lamp beside me switched on. Now this lamp was one of those lamps that has a plastic tube shape, with the bulb inside it, with no way of getting it unless you unscrewed the bottom. The light started to flicker, but not in a subtle flicker, it was a violent flicker. I jumped and stared at it for a moment. Then, I don't know how this was possible, but the light became very bright. Brighter than it ever was, and this lamp's brightness couldn't be adjusted. I got frightened, but I wasn't prepared to sleep just yet. I turned away from the lamp, facing the bedroom wall. And when I looked at the wall, I saw a shadow. At first I assumed it was a shadow of myself, but then I looked at where it was on the wall. It was too big of a shadow to be mine. The shadow had no shape, just some sort of weird blob. I don't know why, but I felt like I had to keep looking at it. I couldn't take my eyes off it. The shadow then started to shift in shape, and before my eyes, I saw a silhouette of my papa. The shadow was facing sideways, if that makes sense. The head shape, the nose, and the body structure fit John perfectly. The shadow started moving towards me on the wall. I looked towards where whatever would be casting the shadow should have been, but there was nothing. Before the shadow reached me on the wall, I hid under my duvet in sheer panic. I waited a few minutes under my duvet, wondering if grief had grabbed hold of me and was now messing with me. But then I heard this smashing noise, like glass. My lamp went out completely. I never came out from underneath my duvet. I ended up falling asleep under there. The next morning I woke up and my room was eerily cold. I got out of bed and looked around my room, thinking back to last night and what I saw. I put it to my mind just playing tricks on me. I went downstairs to speak to my mum, and she asked how I slept. I explained to her I was up until stupid hours again, as she knew I was struggling to sleep. She looked at me to ask if I heard anything last night. I looked at her with a confused expression, then shook my head. She told me she heard something like glass breaking, and then it hit me. I remember my lamp going out along with the sound of glass breaking. I looked at her sheepishly, as I thought she'd never believe my experience, but I told her what I heard and what I saw. She looked at me with a concerned face and asked me to bring the lamp downstairs. She wanted to unscrew the bottom and look at the bulb. I agreed and ran upstairs to grab it, and then came back down. My mum unscrewed the bottom of the lamp and began to take it out. As soon as a reasonable sized gap opened up, shards of glass fell out onto the table. My heart fell out of my arse, and my mind was going a million miles a minute, trying to figure out what the fuck just happened. I didn't sleep in my room that night. I grabbed my sleeping bag and slept on my mum's bedroom floor. I guess I thought I'd feel safe in there, but I was wrong. The following night I was tossing and turning trying to sleep. My mum was already asleep, so I didn't have the luxury of staying up. I didn't want to wake her. As I stared at the ceiling, I heard a voice. All right, Talia LaBelle? That was how John greeted me. Talia LaBelle was a nickname he'd called me. I shot up and looked around the room, and there was just silence. I told myself that I was losing it, and there was no way that was real. I tried to calm down and eventually fell asleep. Over the next few months, weird things were happening around the house. Lights were turning on and off by themselves. The TV would occasionally turn on by itself, and my cat would randomly puff up and hiss at nothing. It was becoming too much, and I didn't know what to do or think. I just knew it wasn't normal. I don't know how to explain it really, but one day everything just stopped. No more weird shadows, no more lights randomly turning on and off. Nothing. The day after everything stopped, I was told by a family member that my gran had gone and spread my Papa John's ashes without telling most of my family, without telling me. Anger took over me. I will put my hands up and say that I absolutely lost my shit, and probably wasn't the best thing to do at the time, but I didn't care. I was hurt, angry, and felt once again I had just lost my papa. That night I went to bed angry and fell asleep, and this is where the dream started. I was sitting at the dinner table in my own house. There is no light and no one else is around. I heard the chair beside me move, and someone sat beside me. It was him. It was John. He looked at me and said, all right, Talia LaBelle?" My eyes filled up with tears, and I gave John the biggest hug I could. "Now listen, I know you're upset, but I need you to be strong for me. You know that, right?" he said to me. I looked at him and nodded, and as soon as he had appeared, he got up from the chair and vanished. I woke up with tears rolling down my face, but I wasn't sad. I felt at ease. I felt content. Since that night I have had occasional dreams that involve John visiting me and talking to me. I am aware this could be my subconscious making these things up in my head, but honestly I don't think it is. I think it's John visiting me. Whenever we talked, he'd always ask me how the family were, how my gran was. I think the most memorable dream I had was when I was in a strange log cabin, and there was an old ham radio, and John's voice came through. He was telling me he was proud of me, how happy he was that I was growing up, and the best part for me was him telling me how tall I've gotten. The women in my family are all quite short, but somehow genetics helped me tower them all. I often think back to that first night with the shadow, and to this day I am still on the fence on whether this was all reality, or if my mind was playing a huge series of tricks on me. Thank you for sending that encounter in, Lauren. I just wanted to send a little apology out there to the people who send me these stories. I tend not to respond to an email until I'm about to include their encounter in a video, otherwise it just becomes too hard for me to keep track. Most of the stories submitted here were sent to me back in the summer, so if you have emailed me and I haven't gotten back to you, it's very likely you are somewhere in my backlog of messages to read through. That being said, I am always on the lookout for new paranormal stories. So if you want your encounter featured on an upcoming episode of Night Drive Paranormal, please send me a message to the tape library at protonmail.com, including as much detail as you can, and whatever name you wish to be credited under. On to case number 2. I grew up in rural East Texas, in a plain house in the middle of a huge pasture. We didn't really have neighbours, and both the land we lived on and the cows we cared for were both passed down through my family's generations. Over the years I've had several odd experiences in that house. The first I can remember was constantly waking up with the sheets on my bed being pulled off to one side. At the time I was sleeping on the bottom bunk of a 2-bunk bed, the top bunk being vacant. Every other night I would wake up to the covers having been pulled towards the side next to my bedroom wall, until one night I woke up from a dream and thought I had felt the covers tug towards that same side. I laid there for a moment and I felt it tug again. I immediately burst out of my bed and ran across the house to my parents' room. I made my dad sleep with me for the rest of the night, even though he didn't believe anything I was saying. When I got older and graduated to a full-size bed, the sheets and covers continued to mysteriously remove themselves. Some mornings all of them would be on the floor, and others just the sheets, or just the covers. I toss and turn at night, but it always struck me as odd that such a selective amount could be on the floor, and the other remain on the bed. I can also recall one night where I had just retired to bed and turned off my lights, only to hear my dad coming down the hallway towards my room. My parents' house has wood flooring, and my dad's work boots made a very distinct sound as he walked around. I heard his boots stop at my doorway, and I laid there waiting for him to tell me he needed help with the land or around the house in the morning, as he often did, but it was silent. I rose up and saw that my open doorway was empty. I didn't think much of it and lay back down. I closed my eyes, and barely a moment had passed after I laid my head on my pillow, and I felt a soft but deliberate thud on the foot of my bed. I bolted upright only to be met again with empty darkness. My parents have actually just finished redoing the flooring in the house, because it wasn't laid down properly the first time, when my sister and I were little. This made it much creakier in corners. So I know it wasn't my dad having a go at me by sneaking around. He isn't the type to pull those sorts of pranks either. There was another instance shortly after that where I had my first and only experience with sleep paralysis. It was in the morning and the broad daylight outside had entered my room. I woke up on my back and couldn't move, but I could see around my room and hear my parents shuffling around in the kitchen. I started to feel an invisible pressure on my feet that gradually slid up my entire body until I could barely breathe from the phantom weight. I tried to yell out or move but couldn't. The whole thing must have lasted for 2 or 3 minutes, but I still remember the immense pressure and the feeling of utter helplessness. I've since moved out of my parents' house, but my mum and my sister still call me from time to time to tell me about something new that's happened in the house, particularly in and near my old room. My sister has told me she's heard knocking outside her room and on the headboard of her bed. My mum told me that my sister's boyfriend once stayed the night in my old room and woke up to find the jeans he had put on the floor were soaking wet in the morning. There wasn't a leak, and he hadn't gotten them wet prior to retiring for the night. For a while, some of my college textbooks had been left on the floor in boxes at one side of my room. The last time I tried sleeping in there, I heard what sounded like a textbook being opened, and the pages being quickly fluttered before shutting. I made no argument or fuss when I got out of bed and slept on the couch that night. I've had other strange and sometimes chilling moments in my life at the places I've lived and worked since leaving my childhood home. Phantom bangs at a bakery I used to work at, a door shaking violently at me, even audible whispers being breathed directly in my ear at the apartment my partner and I reside in now. None of them have been as consistent as my old room though. It wasn't until writing this down that I realised I haven't even had any episodes of my bed covers being removed in the night since sleeping somewhere else. I think it also might be prudent to point out that my parents built the house they live in, and no one else has ever lived in the house or come close to dying on the property. I can't help but feel somewhat responsible for whatever is happening at my parents' house. I have always been attracted to the paranormal, and I've always been more spiritually open than my parents would have preferred. I know now that you can easily attract things to you, if you give it enough thought and dedication. I've been thinking about looking into everything lately. I'd like to know if it's something about me that's been attracting all these experiences, or if I just have happened to find myself at the right place at the right time. Of all my experiences, I've never seen anything. It's only ever been noises or faint touches here and there. That's something I can't help but feel like I'm eventually going to stumble into, however. I'm not sure whether my stories are sensational enough to be included in one of your episodes, but I wanted to send it in nonetheless. I hope that someone can relate to what I've shared, and that they can find the same solace I take in hearing what others have to share. If you enjoy these encounters, please don't forget to subscribe and click like. That way you will find out whenever I release a new episode. time for Case 3. My interest in the paranormal was instilled at a young age. Both my mother and hers have had experiences, seen things, been part of the unexplained. If my mum will consent, I will share hers, but for now we'll examine mine. I was a goth kid in the 90s. What I mean by that is not just my musical tastes. Yes, I was shrouded in black and lace, a practitioner of Wicca, trying to teach myself in the Bible Belt. I frequented old places and, yes, had romantic conquests in graveyards. I was all but desperate to know the spirit world, to have my own relationship with the unknown. I sought it out in English castles and Civil War battlegrounds and forts, and never had so much as a cold breeze brush my neck. I kept looking anyway, my black painted fingernails on a pale hand, trying to reach out in offering. Searching. Anyway, 30-ish years ago I moved in with my girlfriend in Chicago, much to the chagrin of her mother when she found out I wasn't just a friend who happened to be a girl. It was a month, maybe 2 into this arrangement that I was being driven out to a supposedly paranormal hotspot. Outside of the city there is a forest, where the mob used to perform executions and dump bodies. I cannot recall the exact place we stopped any longer. The memories of that day are a bit of a whirlwind, and you will soon understand why. So the 3 of us, firm believers that there had to be something more beyond mere human sight, get out of the car. I want to say this was mid-November. We were all decked out in our black leathers and such. This was before our phones were able to do more than make a phone call, or very pricey text messages. They simply wanted to show me some place sightings had been reported, and rumours of the streets still spoke of. We were there about 20 minutes, still within eyeshot of the car when it happened. I remember I started hearing this thumping sound. There was no visible source for this, and it steadily started getting louder and faster. Our sister had a camera and was taking dreadfully gothic black and white photos when I inquired of my company if they could hear that sound. The answer was no, and the sound continued as the grey sky seemed to be getting darker, as though some storm was suddenly swooping in on us. Again, they perceived nothing. I never saw anything else, never heard anything else. In short order I realised that the sound was my heartbeat. As my heart steadily began to pound, I felt a sense of urgency bordering on panic. We had to leave this place. We had to go. Now. Something was horribly, dreadfully wrong, and we had to be somewhere else. The 2 were more than amused and teased me a little bit at first, but as I turned pale, paler, and my panic kept rising, I finally got them into the car and away we went. The further we got, the calmer and more perplexed I became. I have no understanding of what happened, but the why of it was more clear when we arrived home. R's niece, a child of 5 years old that I hadn't even met yet, had passed away at the time of my experience. Suddenly, unexpectedly. Since that day I have been, perhaps unfortunately, able to not predict exactly, but I have an awareness of some deaths that have occurred within my own family, and 1 or 2 of people close to the ones I feel the closest connection with at the time. I have never gone back there. I feel there is no need. Whatever oddness or awareness of death and the beyond has lingered, the key was turned and door opened, though I was rather hoping to meet a fae or be able to speak with those lost or something, but an intermittent connection with the great equalizer is what I was given. Mum always said knowledge is power, but that's it. That's my major spook event. No wailing spirits, no apparition, no real anything beyond my attunement. Again, understand if this isn't spooky enough or the right flavour, but this is the first time I've ever shared this experience with anyone. It feels cleansing, really. Before this experience, I would have been proclaiming my powers or whatever and trying to be oh so cool. After it, I feel no need. It is what it is. It didn't and hasn't saved anyone. It hasn't changed the world. I don't know what this is, but it's mine, and I'm grateful. If you want to hear more from me, Night Drive Paranormal is the more laid back and minimalist take on my main show, The Tape Library. So if you want to hear more real life paranormal stories, then be sure to check that out. Case number 4 now. And we're off to New England. I have something special to share that viewers on the channel may find interesting. It's one of the strangest things I've ever seen, so here's my story. I was working as an EMT in a small town in New England. As an EMT, we can get called out during any hour of the day for cases that range from a headache to cardiac arrest. Luckily, this was something a bit tamer. My partner and I were on a transfer call for a liver from one nearby hospital to another in an ambulance. We dropped off the liver, and when we started going back it was around 10 PM. We had dispatch on and radio chatter from nearby ambulances, and 911 call centres was going through, just in case we have to take any more calls. This will tie in a bit later. To get back to our ambulance station, we had to take the back roads that led up to this hill, with our town and station just down it. That wasn't until I noticed a bright white light in the side mirror. I assumed it was just a dumbass with the higher beams on. However, the light kept getting brighter and brighter, until our cabin was flooded in this intense bright white light. I looked at my partner and told him to speed up. I tried looking back to see what was making the white light, but it was too bright to make anything out. At some point, the radio chatter on dispatch began to sound scratchy, until it was almost completely incomprehensible. I was already uneased. Now I was terrified. So was my partner. We tried to get in contact with our home station, but nothing went through. A few moments later, ahead of us was the lights of the town, which seemed to deter the lights from whatever was chasing off. It started to dim rapidly. I looked back to take a look at what was making the lights, and what I saw was a black triangle silhouette, with red, yellow and purple lights at each corner of the craft. As we descended into the town, it slowly disappeared from view. My partner and I discussed it all the way back to the station, and agreed to keep it between him and I. I told one other person, however, and they suggested ideas of UFOs, which brought a shiver down my spine. I used to call myself a skeptic in the paranormal, but this tested my views. For case number 5, we're off to India, so sorry in advance for my inevitable pronunciation butchering. My father has always honoured a profound passion for heritage, which led him to acquire a small fort nestled in the heart of Rajasthan. Known as the Land of the Kings, Rajasthan is celebrated for its majestic palaces, grand forts, and rich, tumultuous history. This particular fort was bestowed by a former ruler upon a minor noble family, serving as a distinct outpost and a small stronghold in times of conflict. Constructed over 2 centuries ago, it remained in the hands of that family until my father purchased it. Following India's independence and the consequent decline of royal power, the fort's upkeep has suffered. It was only through my father's painstaking restoration efforts that the fort regained its former splendour. I should note we are merely commoners, with no noble lineage or royal blood to boast of. Since my father's acquisition of the property, my parents and I would spend the winter months there during my school holidays. Gradually, year by year, the restoration progressed. The fort is encircled by a quaint village, situated 5 kilometres from the nearest town. The villagers harbour numerous superstitions about ghosts and spirits that supposedly haunt the fort. Annually, the village hosts a festival, during which it is believed that the spirit of a long-lost saint possesses one of the villagers, sending them into a trance. Our fort's caretaker once claimed to have seen a shadowy figure wandering on the rooftop. The fort is also the site of a sati ritual, an ancient Hindu practice where a widow would immolate herself on her husband's funeral pyre. This practice was more prevalent among nobility, and one of the fort's rooms bears witness to such a tragic event. The sound of gungroos, anklet bells traditionally worn by women, often resonate through the night, adding an eerie, haunting melody to the atmosphere. During the restoration, my father added a room on the roof, connected to the original structure by a wall. This was the sole structural addition to the fort. On one occasion while spending the night there with my parents, we distinctly heard the sound of anklet bells, loud and clear, as if it were just outside the door. Now for the piece de resistance. One particular unsettling night, my parents, sister, and I were sleeping in a ground floor room. It was a calm, still night, devoid of any wind. My parents and I, all afflicted with insomnia, lay awake, peering into the pitch-black night of our room. This room features 5 doors, all facing the courtyard in front, which formerly served as a stable. Across the courtyard lies a gallery that connects our courtyard to another. My father displays his cherished antiques in this gallery, all secured under lock and key behind glass frames. That night the 3 of us heard a distinct thump, followed by the shattering of glass. We were alone in the fort. The sound unmistakably emanated from the gallery. Concerned about the potential damage to my father's treasured collection, we were nevertheless reluctant to venture out into the dark, eerie fort. The darkness seemed to thicken, enveloping the fort in a sinister embrace. Every creak and rustle seemed amplified, as if the fort itself was whispering secrets of its haunted past. The following morning, with daylight offering a semblance of courage, we discovered one of the cases had an open lock, but a closed frame. A painting had fallen to the floor, but fortunately was unharmed. It depicted our deity, Krishna, with his beloved consort Radha, positioned directly in front of the door. It was as if some unseen force had deliberately placed it there, to be found. In response, we summoned a priest to perform rituals for our well-being and prosperity. The priest spoke of lingering spirits and restless souls, further deepening our unease. We remain uncertain about the cause of the incident, and continue to pray that no malevolent forces bring us harm. My mother insists on selling the fort, but my father's unwavering dedication and efforts make this a difficult decision. Though we do not reside there permanently, we continue to spend about 2 months each year at the fort, tense of any face-to-face encounter with whatever else may reside there. Case 6 now, and we've got another person who appears to have experienced phenomena throughout their life. I was born in Tennessee, and when I was 2 my family had to move to Washington State, near Vancouver. We lived there for 12 years of my life. Nothing strange happened until I was 10. I started seeing things, hearing things, and feeling constantly watched. I was playing my guitar one day when I heard and saw a shadow figure open my bedroom door out of the corner of my eye. I turned to look at it and nothing was there, and my door was closed. This became normal, seeing shadow figures out of the corner of my eyes. But at 11, I started hearing screams and cries for help. I genuinely thought I was going crazy. I didn't tell anyone, but then the sleep paralysis started. I would wake up unable to move, and I'd see a black mass the size of a 6-year-old child. No eyes, all just black. It would slowly walk towards me, lifting its arms to touch me, speaking my name and asking for help. Then I would move and it would be gone. I didn't know about sleep paralysis at the time. Only when I was 15 did I learn about it. These things plagued me until I was 13, when all of a sudden it stopped. I felt normal, sane, safe. We moved back to the same city in Tennessee I was born in a couple of months before my 14th birthday. I knew about the rules of Appalachia, but I didn't believe in those things or the paranormal for that matter. Late in 2020, I met my now husband, and a girl who I thought would be my best friend, but she changed my look on so many things. Let's call her Nexus. She believed in the paranormal. She believed she could befriend it, see it, hear it, even be followed by it. I thought she was some weird Chicago girl, for that's where she came from, but she was cool, so I went along with her strange ideas. For our first sleepover, I went to her house. She lived out in the country and had a whole forest for a backyard. Now, I grew up as an outdoors person. I loved the woods, but these were different. I didn't want to go into them. They looked sick. I know I can survive alone in the forest, but for some reason I wouldn't dare spend one night in her woods alone. And I know you don't go into the woods without a gun, but somehow I knew that wouldn't be enough to save me. Late that night we were talking and she told me about these two things that looked like people. One was a tall man with a dog, and the other was a woman, whose face she couldn't make out. She said they weren't human or spirits, but one was bad and the other was good. I thought she had an overactive imagination. That's what I chalked my mental stuff up to. She broke a rule. For those who know, you know. She left her bedroom window blinds open and would constantly look out the window. I never did. I always felt watched and didn't want to see what was out there, so I would beg her to close the blinds before turning off the lights. She didn't want to, but finally she did. As we were sitting on her bed, I heard a dog walking in the house, but it sounded reversed, yet coming closer to her door. All of the dogs were outside. I thought I was hearing things again, but then she asked me if I heard that, and she describes it in the same way. I said I was ready for bed and turned off the light and went to bed on the floor that was provided for me to sleep on. I closed my eyes and tried hard to fall asleep when I felt a dog lay on my feet. A big dog. I opened my eyes and she was on her bed, and nothing was at my feet, except there were indents on the sheets. I could move, so it wasn't sleep paralysis. I stayed still and closed my eyes. That thing stayed there all night, but come day it was gone. Later that day she told me that the man stood at her bed until she fell asleep. I was scared. Now I'm a Christian girl, but I don't believe a demon can ever have me as long as I have faith. These weren't demons. The next time I was at her house I saw a drawing journal, so I looked through it. I found drawings of the woman with her face scribbled over, and an attempt of the man and dog. They looked like the creepy kid drawings you see in horror movies. The next sleepover at her place something happened. It was 1 or 2 in the morning. We were just casually talking about normal stuff like art, sewing, plants, when all of a sudden there was this roar mixed with a boom. Here in the south our thunder can shake a house and it rolls throughout the sky. But this was not thunder. The sky was clear and it sounded different. We both grabbed each other's hands and held tightly. Now I'm a straight girl and that was the first time I'd held a female's hand. I was so scared. We both looked at each other and started crying. Finally we turned off the lights and stayed in the bed together until sleep took us. The next day we asked her mum if she heard thunder or a loud boom. She said no. None of her family did. We went around the house to try and recreate the sound, dropping buckets, wood, hitting things. Nothing sounded like that. 4th of July 2021. My family had a ton of people out to our house, including Nexus and her family. That night she told me they followed her to my home. The man and the woman. I hoped they would leave with her. The man didn't. 3 or 4 weeks later I was walking my dog before bed. It was dark and we had some woods to the side of our house. I stayed on the front porch and normally my dog would go on the grass and do his business. He refused to leave the porch. I thought that was odd, and then I looked up to my left, where the woods were, where my dog was looking. And there in the shadow of the tree line was a tall man. I couldn't make out his features. Then my dog ran to the front door and I ran with him. We went inside and locked the door and I went to my room with my dog, closed my blinds and slept with the light on. My dog was shaking, and the fact he knew something was there before me, that scared me more. Then my sleep paralysis started coming back. The same childlike figure. My woods felt more dangerous now. My dog wouldn't go in, so I didn't either. Now this dog, I've had him since I was 8 years old. He slept with me, stays by my side and loves the woods. If he doesn't go somewhere, neither do I. Nexus then told me it feels like the man and the woman were beckoning her to go into the woods at night. I told her not to. I told her not to trust them. I don't know if she ever did, or if she even believes in these things now. She and I parted ways when I was late 16 or early 17. I got the name Nexus from her. It was the name she gave herself. Shortly before my husband and I got married, I told him all of these things. I said, "You probably think I'm crazy." He actually believed me and still does. He knows there's a whole world of things we humans don't understand. Neither of us believe in ghosts, but we know there are things that reside in nature that are not meant for humans to meet. Now that we're married, if I suffer from sleep paralysis or night terrors, he'll hold me and help me sleep again. Many of my night terrors I end up hurting him. I don't mean to, and he doesn't hold it against me. If he knows it'll be a rough night for me, he'll make me a herbal tea with honey that naturally improves sleep. And usually I sleep well on those nights. Occasionally I will still hear things, or if I go to historical sites I can feel the residual energy of those who came before us. I always could do that, even as a child. I haven't seen things since being married though, and moving into our own place. But I'm waiting. I know it hasn't ended yet. One last note, I don't take medications or I've never been diagnosed with anything mental. So what happens to me I genuinely believe is not my imagination. I hope you're still with me out there. I'm afraid we've only got time for one more tale tonight. So for one last time, let's jump into the world of the paranormal. In the summer of 2014, my 4-year-old daughter, 10-month-old son and I moved into a home in the quiet neighborhood Sagant Ranch in Killeen, Texas. My then husband was in the army and was away for training in Georgia when the kids and I moved in. I want to note that I found this house online and was captivated by the pictures of the empty rooms in the listing. I would often look at them several times in a trance-like state. It was almost as if I was somehow transported there while staring at the pictures. In my mind I was there in every way, as if I were there in person. I could feel its surroundings around me, and it just felt like home. Exactly where I was meant to be, where I wanted to be. Almost immediately after moving in, things began to happen. Subtly at first, but that wouldn't last long, for this house had a story to tell, and it was determined that I listen. My mother, who lived in San Antonio, Texas, kept the kids for a week so I could unpack. The first incident occurred the moment she left. After unpacking a few boxes downstairs, I began to carry items upstairs, and that's when I saw 2 small children out of the corner of my eye, a young boy and a girl. Shaking it off as just being tired from the move. However, I kept seeing them. They were both expressionless. The boy wore a collared long-sleeve shirt and pants with suspenders. The girl had long curly hair, half up and tied with a ribbon. She wore a dress that I guessed was Victorian. At first I was afraid because after seeing them I felt very uneasy whenever I went upstairs. I felt something was with me, but I did not believe it was the children. After moving boxes upstairs for a while I got used to them, and talked to them as I walked up the steps. I almost felt comforted that they were there, as if they were there to protect me. After a while I called it quits and turned in for the night. The next morning, as I began my day and continued unpacking, I never saw the little boy or girl again. I chalked it up to just needing a good night's sleep and stress from the move. A week passed and my kids returned to stay with me. A few weeks passed without incident, and I had just put the kids down for the night. My husband would be arriving home late that night, so I decided to watch a movie while I waited for him. Halfway through the film I heard a loud thud from what appeared to be upstairs. Ignoring it at first, I kept my focus on the movie. Within seconds I heard the sound again. This time I decided to go upstairs and check on the kids. Pausing the film I headed upstairs. Nothing seemed out of place. I checked on both my kids, who were peacefully sleeping, and seemed undisturbed by the sound. Returning downstairs to the living room I resumed my movie. Minutes passed and I heard the sound again. This time it felt as if it shook the whole house. The thunderous thud did not sound like it was coming from upstairs anymore. It sounded like whatever was causing the noise was on the roof and was powerful enough to shake the house. I immediately paused the film, sitting there momentarily, trying to process what was happening and shaking off my nerves. Not sure what was happening, I continued watching the movie, knowing my husband would be home shortly. As soon as I resumed the film, the sound appeared again, and if I paused the film, the house went quiet. I played with this, noticing that if I ignored it, the sound would repeat. I felt as if whatever was causing the noise was playing with me. It wanted my attention, and if I chose to ignore it, it would continue to seek it. My husband walked through the door a little past midnight. I told him about what I had experienced. He told me it was probably thunder or a tree hitting the roof. However, we had no trees around us, not on our lot or the lots next to us, and it was a calm, clear night. Shortly after our discussion, we went to bed. Again, weeks would go by without incident, until one night. I was surprised to see our dog stopped in front of the wall between our bedroom and the linen closet doors. She sat there, staring up, as if looking at someone. I called her several times, but she didn't move. Her ears didn't perk up at the sound of my voice. It was like she was in a trance. After a few moments, she snapped out of it and ran straight to her kennel. I would soon learn the significance of this event. One night, my husband was upstairs in our bedroom with one of the windows opened, packing for his work trip, when he heard the thud on the lower level roof. It was loud and moving fast towards the open window. We stared at each other, and he instantly closed the window. I will never forget the horror on my husband's face, and the relief I felt that someone else had finally heard this. We went to bed without exchanging a word. He left in the morning and was not expected to return for 8 weeks. During this period, activity ramped up. I started to hear the thud more frequently, but it seemed to move around until finally settling in a space upstairs where 3 closets met, the area where my dog had her incident. Upstairs, my bedroom closet, the hall linen closet, and my son's bedroom closet all convened. From this space I could hear loud bangs, as if something were trapped and trying to escape. Coinciding with this, my son suddenly refused to sleep in his room, and I began to feel uncomfortable with my closet, using it less and less. The upstairs felt heavy and I dreaded being up there. The bangs continued and I began to have unusual dreams of satanic rituals, so vivid it felt like I was there. Upon waking, I was paralysed with fear. To this day, the dreams are etched in my mind, and as I recall these events, my heart races with anxiety. After the dreams, I noticed a shift in my mentality, constantly thinking of reckless things to do, and I didn't understand why. There would be one more incident before I would reach my breaking point. My daughter was at school, and I had just laid my son down for a nap, not knowing how long he would stay asleep in his room. I decided to pay bills upstairs at my desk. I had only been sitting there for maybe 10 minutes when I heard the voice of a child, probably around 6, directly in my right ear, say, "Mummy." I froze. Typing this just now as I sit at my desk sends chills down my spine, and I feel overwhelmingly nauseous as the events I experienced in this home are forever woven into me. My son could only say "Mama," and my daughter wasn't home, and even then she would never call me Mummy. I worked up the courage to move and checked on my son, who was still peacefully sleeping. I called my mum and broke down, telling her everything I had experienced since moving in. Her being Catholic, she suggested I recite the Our Father prayer throughout the home, and she would bless the house with holy water when she came to visit. I did my best to do this, trembling with fear as I walked through the home, reciting the prayer. I reached out to a local paranormal group asking for help. I can't remember the group's name, but I knew they were a few hours away, and it would be a few weeks before they could come for an investigation. My family visited for Halloween, and my mum blessed the home with holy water. Unfortunately, I don't remember anything after. I've tried to recall the events after Halloween, but I just can't. All I see is a black screen in my head. The next memory after that is living in a new house about 3 miles away. Over the years, that house creeps back into my mind and consumes me. I have a strong urge to return to it, and I feel one day I will find myself parked outside its front door. It's like I'm drawn to it, like it's calling me. I long to understand what happened there, and to know the story of the dark energy that resides there. I requested the police records of the property and found nothing other than a domestic disturbance between a mother and her daughter. I have attempted to contact residents living there after us, inquiring if they have experienced anything unusual, but had no luck there either. I am a history major and an aspiring historian, so naturally I began researching the land and surrounding areas with a colleague. We discovered the Maxdale Bridge and Cemetery, which is 13 miles from the house on Scorn Drive. My colleague and I are still researching the area, trying to piece together what could have caused the events I experienced. I've begun to write a book about my experiences, and hopefully I will finally be able to get closure, or at least as much closure as the house will allow. Thank you for taking the time to read my story. I hope someone will hear it and help shed some light. That's all for tonight, I'm afraid. I'm going to have to leave you on the dark road alone once again. It feels like you never quite make it back home, doesn't it? Instead, you just fall further and further into the darkness. A massive thank you to everyone who made this episode of Night Drive Paranormal possible. Our tape library archivist Umiko Grimm, Sandy Lusk, Restock 1731, Mirror, Judith Hacker, Gabrielle, Eric Salas, Destiny Air, Mashlars Books, Lady Bette Noir, Adeline, Peter McCann, Georgia Harvey, Caliego, Deppy Johnny, Dominic DeAngelis, Dean J. Daly, 1000th Ghost, London Grace, Simon Ulas, Callie Cotts, Megan Reddin, Alfredo Sandalville, Darla, and Queen of Flatulence. The lead archivist Vaniel, Brian Baker, Old Soul Like Mine, Lord William, Tracy Torello, Xavier Angle, Tyler Michael, Ridiculous, Melissa Harrison, Alex O'Neill, and Alex Goldberg. And our grand overseers, Forevan, Morning Rain 2619, Katie, Agent 355, Brockhampton, and Grim Reaper KL. Thank you for joining me on this midnight hour. Until next time, my friends, get home safe.